Hey everybody, welcome to the Bible ReThink. My name is Kenny Panis, and I want to talk about a pushback I received on the last episode I did with the Shroud of Turin, following the evidence. Somebody pointed out that the main explanation that I gave for the 1988 carbon dating being wrong, the invisible weaving hypothesis, actually has been disproved by serious shroud researchers. So I went back and I did the homework, and what I found was actually more compelling, and I want to talk about that today. But before I get into this, I just want to remind you why any of this shroud talk matters. We're talking about a piece of cloth, but if that piece of cloth has what many people think it has, we are talking about the possibility that we have a physical artifact of the most important moment in human history, the resurrection of Jesus. So if that is what this is, then the carbon dating question is not just a footnote, but it's an entrance into the front door. So my name is Kenny Panis. I'm from the Bible ReThink, and that's what we're going to be talking about on this episode of the Midweek Snack. Stay tuned. Welcome back, everyone. Again, my name is Kenny Panis of the Bible ReThink channel. Just a pastor doing this YouTube thing. So on episode 1, I covered the shroud in depth. The photographic negative discovered by Segunda Pia in 1898. Remember that image that only becomes clear when it's reversed? It's thought to be a negative, but it's actually a positive. It's quite haunting to Pia. The VP8 3D spatial encoding that was discovered in 1977. Remember, that has depth information that no painting or photograph could duplicate, but the shroud shows that 3D topographical illustration. The blood evidence, type AB, with heightened levels of bilirubin, which is secreted when a victim is under traumatic stress and pain. So the wounds also are consistent with Roman crucifixion, down really to the forensic detail. And we covered the hammer, the 1988 carbon dating, which dated the cloth to the medieval times and labeled it a forgery. And how do we debate that? Well, there was a man named Joe Marino and his wife, Sue Benford. Benford uncovered what's known as the French invisible reweaving process as the leading explanation for the why that date might be wrong. The idea was this: the corners sampled in 1988 had been invisibly repaired with medieval linen. The newer material skewed the carbon date toward the 14th century. But they weren't scientists, so they needed somebody to really prove the case. And that someone was Ray Rogers, Los Alamos chemist, original member of the STIRP research team. He examined the actual threads to disprove the theory, as he would say, in 5 minutes. But what he found was cotton fibers, a dye, and a compound called vanillin. And it's not found anywhere else in the entire shroud. And he even published that in a peer-reviewed journal that's highly respected by scholars in this field in 2005. So that was the case that I presented. Then came the pushback. A commenter pointed out that I had not addressed Robert Ruckers' hypothesis. And I knew about it, but he was right. I didn't do that. I was thinking in terms of time restraints and trying to really finish out with Ray Rogers. But here's what I want you to hold to as we go through this episode. every researcher that we're about to discuss, on every side of the methodology debate, they believe that the shroud is the burial cloth of Jesus of Nazareth. You have to understand that even within that community, the pro-authenticity community, there are some that agree with the theory and others that don't. So we're not debating if the shroud is real on this episode. That was the last time. This episode, we're debating how the carbon date got it wrong in the first place. And we already mentioned the French reweaving hypothesis. So, the pushback. Here's where it gets a little bit complicated. So I want to introduce you to a young lady named Mechthild Flury-Lemberg. She is 96 years young, born in Hamburg, Germany in 1929, and she has spent her entire professional life working with some of the most precious ancient textiles in the world. Flury-Lemberg is not a skeptic. She believes the shroud is first century. She believes it, and she also believes the Sudarium Oviedo, which we touched on briefly, also covered the same body that you see in the image. It's crazy. The body of Jesus. She has no interest in debunking the shroud, and she has spent decades defending its authenticity. But she drew a line. How do you do that? When it came to invisible French reweaving. In 2002, she physically examined the corner during a reconstruction, including the reverse side for the first time in 500 years. And she found no trace of any mending operation. Invisible French reweaving, no matter how skilled, they will always leave a trace on the back side of the cloth. She looked and she found nothing. So does that settle the debate? Not exactly. Because of who Ray Rogers is. He was not looking at thread structure. He was looking at chemistry. He used pyrolysis and mass spectrometry and microchemical testing on the actual shroud samples. And he found, and this is important, substances that were foreign. Cotton fibers, a dye, and a gum coating. Flury-Lemberg examined the physical textile structure, but Rogers examined the thread composition through chemistry. So we have different disciplines, different tools, and different questions. Flury-Lemberg found nothing. Rogers found foreign substances. And to this day, his findings have never been refuted in a peer-reviewed journal. And that's significant. And both of them believe that this is the burial cloth of Jesus. As I mentioned, even within that pro-authenticity community, the mechanism might be disputed, but they all agree this is the first century shroud of Jesus. And the reweaving hypothesis, as compelling as Rogers' chemistry is, there are some things that it just cannot explain that we're going to get into. And what I'm suggesting is that there's a better suggestion, a better explanation. And it comes from a nuclear engineer named Robert Rucker. So Robert Rucker has a master's degree in nuclear engineering from the University of Michigan. He spent 38 years in the nuclear industry, designing reactors and analyzing nuclear data for the United States government. So he's not no small fish in the pond. He's not a pastor who's trying to defend his faith. He's a nuclear engineer who spent nearly 4 decades running the same kind of software used to design nuclear reactors. He started researching the Shroud around 2014, and in 2025, he co-authored a peer-reviewed paper with Giulio Fonte, one of the world's leading Shroud scientists. After 12 years of researching, running calculations, studying the evidence, working through the physics, Robert Rucker believes the man on the Shroud is none other than Jesus of Nazareth. He believes that image was formed at the exact moment of the resurrection. And this is not a conclusion that he arrived at lightly. This is where the evidence led him. A nuclear engineer for 38 years with professional expertise. And so I want to show you what he found. There were problems that not a lot of people know about the carbon dating testing. 4 of them to be specific. So when you look at the 1988 carbon dating, the factor in related evidence are 4 anomalies that need to be explained. And the first 3 are in the actual data itself. And the 4th, I'm just going to be honest here, depends on whether you accept the Shroud and the Sudarium of Oviedo, that they covered the same body. We'll get into that in a second. But the blood that was found on the Sudarium strongly matches. The wounds strongly match what's on the Shroud. It's worth noting, first of all, that of these 4 anomalies that we're going to look at today, the French invisible reweaving hypothesis can only address one of them, the first one. Anomaly number 1, the medieval date. Everybody knows it, 1260 to 1390 AD. It was the result that crushed the spirits of many in the church. The reweaving hypothesis was solely built to explain this. This is a medieval patching job. But then there's anomaly 2. It's known as the gradient. And this is important to understand. Carbon dates actually increase as you move across the sample, about 36 years per centimeter. So Oxford came back with the earliest date, Arizona with the latest. And it wasn't random variation. This is a systematic pattern that goes across the entire cloth. It gets older. The dates don't scatter. They shift consistently like a ramp in one direction. Anomaly number 3. From these samples, there were actually subsamples from that corner. 12 smaller pieces that were cut at the corner, sampled, and tested across the 3 labs. And their dates range, are you ready? 1155 to 1410 AD. I mean, we're talking about a 255-year spread from what is supposedly one consistent piece of medieval cloth that has been forged. That one is certainly an anomaly. And then I mentioned anomaly number 4 is the Sudarium of Oviedo, the face cloth in Spain. And the reason why it's included is because it has blood type AB, and it matches the Shroud, and that's the rarest blood form, and it's more common in Middle East in the area of Jerusalem. You also see wound patterns. If you look at this drawing here, it's the Shroud, and it's overlaid with this burial cloth, and you can see how the wounds align. There's written documentation about this being in existence since 631 AD. But it's also worth noting, full disclosure, the Sudarium has been carbon dated not once, not twice, but multiple times across multiple laboratories. And the results range roughly from 600 to 800 AD. So again, there's a large spread in those numbers. And like the Shroud, the results show this spread that continues to go in that one direction where it gets older every centimeter. So think about that. Researchers who have studied both cloths believe the Sudarium covered the same face of that man in the Shroud. It also would have been carbon dated wrongly, if that's even a word, by the same kind of margin. So Rucker's hypothesis is it explains all four of these anomalies with one single cause. And that's what happened at the tomb. I got to talk about the physics. And I'm going to try to do this as simply and succinct as possible. Because this is one of the reasons why I didn't include this in the first episode. Just the magnitude of depth here. Here we go. Carbon dating works like a clock. So when the plant dies, which is the Shroud was made of plant, carbon-14 starts decaying at a known rate. So it's known. That rate is known. And scientists measure what is left. The remnant, if you will. And they calculate the age that way. But if someone added, and here comes the hypothesis, new carbon-14 to the clock after it started, the clock is going to read younger than it actually is. You didn't change the hands, the time. You just added new batteries. And now the time is wrong. Rucker says that's exactly what happened inside the tomb on that first day of the week. He says a burst of neutrons, and this is where the energy comes from to produce the resurrection, passed through the cloth. Just passed through the cloth. And those neutrons were absorbed by the nitrogen atoms already within the linen fibers there. And what happens when a nitrogen atom absorbs a neutron? You got it. It becomes carbon-14 atom. New carbon-14. Added after the clock had already started. Pushing both the Shroud's date and the Sudarium's date forward by centuries. To shift the date, for example, from the time of Jesus all the way to the Middle Ages, say 1260 when the sample was carbon dated to, would require only a 16% increase in carbon-14. So Rucker's nuclear computer modeling shows that this is completely consistent with neutron distribution that you would expect to find in a first century limestone tomb. Now here's where the science becomes something more. Rucker's hypothesis, it does not just explain the carbon date, but explains how the image was actually formed. And it paints a picture of what happened in the tomb that really makes you think about the resurrection differently. Amazingly. Here's the sequence that Rucker proposes. When Jesus was buried, the cloth is in contact. Think about the top cloth. There's the bottom part of the cloth and the top cloth. Was in contact with the body. Makes perfect sense, right? And blood transfers by direct contact to the inner surface of the cloth. And the blood today is still there. Remember last time I talked about how it acted like a sticker and protected the cloth when the image formed? So here's the thing you have to notice now. When the resurrection occurs, the body of Jesus elevates slightly so that a gap opens between the body and the bottom cloth and a gap between the body and the top cloth. So in a way, there's a gap suspension there. And at that very moment, energy bursts simultaneously upward and downward. And that matters. It is vertical completely. It's not sideways because there's no side images that we see in the shroud. We don't see the ears. We don't see the crown portion top of his head. Only what was directly above and directly below the body. So you're talking this. A vertical line, like a laser beam, going upward and going downward. And the energy passes through the cloth and imprints the image. And this is what's so amazing about this. It imprints the image on the outside of top of the cloth, not on the inside. And the image is also on the outside of the bottom of the cloth because it's folded, remember? It's the same cloth, different surfaces. It's amazing. The image is on the top, outside, and on the bottom, outside. And the body is gone. And the clothes, or the cloths, pardon me, settle flat, and two images are left, both on the outer surfaces. In John 20, when Peter and John run to the tomb, we read that the cloths are lying there. They're not unwrapped. They're not distributed. They're just lying flat, and the face cloth is folded or rolled separately. And so Jesus left it in order. There was no crime committed, no body stolen. This was just a tomb that was left in order by someone who resurrected that was not in a hurry. So what does the scripture tell us? Let me step back from physics and put on my pastor's cap. John 20, we follow the risen Jesus. Disciples are gathered behind locked doors because they're afraid. And out of nowhere, Jesus appears right among them. Now, to be fair, John doesn't say he walked through the door. He says Jesus was suddenly there inside when the doors were locked. But John included that detail about the locked door for a reason. I think the implication is unmistakable. The body that came out of that tomb was not subject to the same physical limitations as the body that went into it. There's Matthew 17. And you have to go further back, even before he was crucified. The transfiguration. Before the cross, before the tomb, Jesus was on the mountain, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light, and his disciples fell on their faces in terror. This was not the resurrection. This was a momentary glimpse of what was underneath the hood of Jesus. A preview of the glory of the resurrection. Revelation 1. Here, the Apostle John, the same one that ran to the tomb with Peter, who saw the clothes lying there flat and the face cloth rolled up and set to the side, he sees the risen Christ in his full glory decades later. And he falls on his face as if dead. And suddenly the face of Jesus is like the sun shining at full strength. Think about that. The sun shining at full strength is not something you can even look into. You can't look up in the sky and hold that gaze for long because it's something that overwhelms you. That is the same thing that happened to the person who was underneath this cloth. And finally, there's Psalm 16:10. It's a prophecy that David wrote 1,000 years before the crucifixion and is quoted by Peter at Pentecost. You will not allow your Holy One to undergo decay. And the shroud image shows no decomposition products, no evidence of the body of Jesus that began to break down while wrapped inside the cloth. The prophecy said the body would not see decay, and the cloth is consistent with that. Scripture is not describing mythology. It's describing a real event of an extraordinary physical power. So where do I land in all of this? Well, I want to be straight with you. I am a pastor, not a nuclear engineer, not a material scientist, but I follow the evidence and I tell you what I find, including if I get it wrong, which is partly why we're doing this video today. Here's where I land. The invisible reweaving has unresolved problems. Doesn't mean you entirely dismiss it. It has unresolved problems. Flury-Lemberg, who believes that this is the body burial cloth of Jesus, she examined that cloth in person and found nothing. Joe Marino, Sue Benford, they looked at photographs that were very exceptional on a computer screen. But the fact that she touched it and looked underneath the corner, it carries professional weight. The reweaving hypothesis also cannot explain the gradient that increases in age as you go across the cloth. If it's just a sample, then it would be the sample would change, but then the cloth would go back to the regular age. Something was chemically different about that corner. Ruckers' nuclear absorption hypothesis, it really is the most comprehensive explanation that I have found. It's wild, but it explains all 4 carbon dating anomalies with one cause. Its predictions are testable. It was developed by a man with 38 years doing exactly that kind of nuclear analysis. What I am confident about is the 1988 carbon testing is not the final word, even though the scientific community sometimes suggests it is. A single contestant sample from a single corner is not enough to shut the door to close the case. But here's what I know. My faith does not rest on the Shroud of Turin. The resurrection of Jesus stands on its own testimony. The empty tomb, the appearances before 500 people, the transformed lives of the disciples. They turned the world upside down. The explosion of the early church, and the fact that Jesus' power is still present in the world today. The cloth doesn't prove the resurrection 100%, but it surely seems to point to it. If the shroud is what many researchers we've discussed believe it is, then in a garden outside of Jerusalem on the first day of the week, the second Adam walked out of the tomb. And he was naked and unashamed. Nothing to hide, nothing to prove, not in a hurry. He left everything in order. And maybe, just maybe, he left us the most remarkable selfie the world has ever seen. Now I want to hear from you. Where do you land? Tell me in your comments. And if this episode made you think, please subscribe. It helps get the content out, build the channel. My name is Kenny Panis. I'm with the Bible ReThink, where we dig beyond the surface to find truth. So until the next time, may the resurrection of Jesus make a difference in your life. God bless everybody. Take care.